When I reviewed the Google Pixel 5 a few weeks back, the most requested thing I had was how does it compare to the Galaxy S20 FE? Well, at the time I didn't have my hands on the phone, however upon asking Vodafone, they were very much kind enough to send me the S20 FE, so shout out to Vodafone. Now in terms of the phones, outright they're around £100 difference between the two. In other words, this is £599 whilst this is £699. So in this review we'll be exploring to see if the Samsung Galaxy S20 FE is worth the £100 premium over the equivalent Google Pixel 5. Now before getting into this video, if you do have Instagram, I'd very much appreciate a follow. It's at TotallyDubbed, and furthermore if you're interested in all electric or hybrid vehicles, do check out Totally EV. Your support would be greatly appreciated. So first off, let's talk about the build quality and design, and here you can see the S20 FE is much larger than the Google Pixel 5. Now at the back the phone has got a plastic design which doesn't feel as nice as the part aluminium design of the Google Pixel 5, specifically with its texture. What I will say specifically when it comes to using the phone on its back, in other words like this on a flat surface, is that the protruding camera does rock around, whereas the Google Pixel 5's less protruding camera makes for just a little bit of a better experience. Now you can see in terms of the design of the phone that one is bigger than the other, and that also does come across in terms of the weight. This is around 190 grams, whilst the Pixel 5 is 151 grams. Now both phones are IP68 rated or IPX8 depending on what certificate you use with the Google Pixel 5, but in other words they're water resistant to a certain degree. Now the biggest thing for me is, for someone who unlocks their phone quite a lot every day, is that the rear fingerprint sensor of the Pixel 5 is just far superior than the inbuilt fingerprint sensor of the S20 FE. Now while it does respond there, most of the time I found myself frantically just pressing, specifically when it comes to low light conditions. In this respect, in terms of unlocking the phone, the S20 FE does also have facial recognition, so you can unlock your phone with your face as well, whereas you can't do that with the Pixel 5. Again, you might disagree with me, you might prefer using the fingerprint sensor at the front because it means you can unlock your phone when it's faced out forwards, but in my opinion and my experience, I much prefer the rear fingerprint sensor of the Pixel 5. Now when you do come to unlock it, what you'll find is that the overall experience with the two phones are a little bit different, and that's truthfully because the fact that this S20 FE still runs on Samsung's iteration of Android, whereas the Google Pixel 5 uses stock Android, and in other words it's got the most fluid experience. So despite it having a slower chipset, and we'll talk about this in just a bit, the S20 FE still feels somewhat similar, and in comparison to the two phones are kind of indistinguishable. You would almost feel that the Google Pixel 5 is actually just a little bit more fluid in comparison to the S20 FE. So yes, the Android that you get on this is still themed, and some people will hate it, some people will love it, but in my experience I feel that the stock Android experience is still the way to go. Now while I'm in airplane mode right now, both phones do have 5G capabilities, and that's a great sort of feature, specifically if you've got a SIM card that can do 5G, because in this respect the speeds that you get over 5G are far superior over 4G. Of course, depending on your area and depending where you live, you might not benefit from 5G that well, but just worth bearing in mind of course that this is a 5G enabled phone, very much like the Pixel 5, one of its kind of unique selling points. Now a big thing for me is audio capabilities, and here the S20 FE is far superior than the Google Pixel 5, purely because it's got two physical speakers, one at the top over here and one at the bottom, whereas the Google Pixel 5 has one built into the screen and another one at the bottom. As a result, when it comes to watching content on your phone, the stereo experience that you get on the S20 FE is just far superior. I can't stress this enough, and it makes for far better viewing experiences. Even when it comes to actually playing back audio, let's say you put some music in the shower and you just play it through your smartphone speakers, the speakers on the S20 FE are far better than the Google Pixel 5, which was one of the biggest annoyances that I had over the Google Pixel 5 and one of its more, let's say, fundamental flaws. In terms of 3.5mm jack, neither phone have them, and I don't like that at all, but they do have USB Type-C, and you can get the USB Type-C to 3.5mm jack adapter. In my case, I used Apple's Source adapter. I know I'm using all the different manufacturers here, and here I found that the S20 FE's audio quality over 3.5mm jack was a slight bit better, as it added a little bit more dynamism throughout the frequency range, namely when it comes to the lower end tones. Now before moving on, I do want to mention about the displays. As I said before, the S20 FE is bigger, and it's no surprise that this has a 120Hz 6.5-inch Super AMOLED, whilst the Google Pixel 5 has a 90Hz 6-inch OLED. Now you can see that both phones have this kind of toggle, the 90Hz 60Hz toggle on the Pixel 5, while the high and standard mode on the S20 FE. Here I will say that the experience when you have 120Hz is just super fluid. Now the differences might not be super apparent when you're comparing them between the two phones, but hopefully maybe my camera's picking up that the S20 FE just feels just that little bit smoother. It's a very, very slight difference, but it's just that very slight difference in terms of those extra hertz, specifically on a small screen like this, that actually make a difference when it comes to the S20 FE. If you're going to be gaming and you've got apps which are capable of doing 120Hz, then what you'll find is the S20 FE just provides a far fluid experience. Now in terms of the brightness of both phones, they're pretty equivalent, although the Pixel 5 actually came out on top in this domain at around 670 nits in its peak brightness with adaptive brightness enabled. The S20 FE in comparison got around 540 nits. So in terms of overall brightness, the Pixel 5 comes out on top, and you can see where Samsung have potentially cut some costs over here, because in comparison to the flagship Samsung phones which reach over 1000 nits, the S20 FE is somewhat limited. And now we get on to performance, and first off let's talk about the raw specs. The S20 FE has a Snapdragon 865, which in comparison to the Google Pixel 5's 765G is far more impressive. You'll be able to see on your screen right now the benchmark differences, and well, let's put it frank, the S20 FE completely destroys the Google Pixel 5. However, synthetic benchmarks don't always speak the same sort of volumes as to real world experience. Here, when you do compare pure stock Android, aka the Google Pixel 5's Android operating system, versus the more heavily influenced Samsung operating system, which is based on Android, you will find that the S20 FE might not feel as fluid because it's not running in that stock Android format. If the S20 FE was running stock Android, I think the differences would be pretty much, well, in a completely different league, whereby the S20 FE would be completely on top of the Google Pixel 5. Unfortunately, that's not quite the case. In fact, the differences between the two phones in real world usage is actually much more similar than you might think, despite, as I said, despite the performance differences in synthetic benchmarks. Now, the thing I will say, however, is that when it comes to gaming or more intense gaming, the S20 FE's Adreno 650 is a little bit more equipped than the Adreno 620 found on the Pixel 5. As a result, you'll find that you will be dropping frames a little less on the S20 FE. So if you're a real heavy gamer, and when I say hardcore heavy gamer on mobile, then the S20 FE will be a better pick over the Google Pixel 5, despite it running stock Android. Now, while all of this is interesting, the biggest thing over here is that the S20 FE uses UFS 3.1. In other words, a more up-to-date standard when it comes to its storage capacity. And here, the differences are pretty much night and day. And the thing that I can say over here in comparison to actually synthetic benchmark is that the storage is going to make a massive difference if you tend to transfer files in and out of your phone. So for example, if you connect it up to a PC with, let's say, USB 3.1, what you'll find is the S20 FE is far, far superior in this domain, to the point where it just completely makes the Google Pixel 5 look like yesteryear's phone. Now, next up is battery life. The Google Pixel 5 was seriously impressive at around 21 hours in my synthetic benchmark, and here the S20 FE takes it another step forwards. It takes it to 24 hours, which is insane. You can see from the picture over here, the benchmark, it is on top of every other phone, including other Samsung flagship phones. I don't know how Samsung have managed to get the most out of this 4500 milliamp battery, but they've done an incredible job with the S20 FE. In terms of real world experiences, I was using this phone as my daily driver for 2 weeks. I can safely say that the battery benchmark really does reflect in terms of the battery usage in terms of real world usage. Of course, it depends on your mileage, it depends on the way that you use your phone, the apps you're using, how intense they are, how much screen on time you get. But I will say that if you're looking for better battery life, the S20 FE is a better pick again over the Google Pixel 5. Also, when it comes to recharging, you can fast charge the smartphone. Both phones can be recharged fast via a fast charging adapter. And furthermore, it does have wireless charging, very much like the Google Pixel 5, and also can reverse charge as well. So in other words, you can charge a device via the smartphone. So let's say if you've got some true wireless earbuds you want to charge, you can do so via the S20 FE as well as the Google Pixel 5. And now we get on to camera. Now here I did a variety of different tests, and I must say out the bat that the S20 FE did actually surprise me as how good it was able to keep up with the Google Pixel 5. The reason I say keep up is because in a lot of domains the Google Pixel 5 was far superior than other flagship Samsung phones like the S20 Ultra 5G, for example, or the Note 20 Ultra 5G. In this respect, the S20 FE is a far less superior phone over the other Samsung flagships, so I was intrigued to see how it does. Now in terms of raw specs, it's got a 12 megapixel f1.8 camera, it's got a 8 megapixel f2.4 telephoto lens which is capable of 3 times optical zoom, which is pretty nice, and I'll touch upon that in just a bit, and it's got a 12 megapixel ultra wide f2.2. At the front, it's got a 32 megapixel f2.2, and again, we're going to talk about this in just a bit. So in terms of camera comparison, what I will say is the S20 FE has a far better tone. It, again, just very much like the other Samsung flagship phones, provides a much more richer tone. So in this picture of the Honda E, which I was reviewing for Totally EV, so shout out again to Totally EV, is that the fact that the S20 FE just looks a lot more vibrant. You can see that the color tones are just a little bit more punchy. The same goes for this shot. You can see here that the S20 FE does just a little bit of a better job in terms of providing a more colorful tone. While it might not be perfectly accurate in comparison to the Google Pixel 5, which provides a more neutral tone, I think you will agree that the S20 FE to most users will seem a little bit better. Now coming to a more closer macro shot, the Google Pixel 5 here does a great job in providing a good macro shot, although it doesn't blur the background as well as the S20 FE. That is, could be in part to do with the lenses that it uses. As for zooming, there is no competition whatsoever. The S20 FE completely destroys the Google Pixel 5. Very much the same case I said with the Google Pixel 5 in comparison to other Samsung flagship phones. The S20 FE does a great job here, and at 7 times zoom, past its optical range, the S20 FE again it's just far better. Now moving on to the ultra wide shots, the differences are a little less different in comparison to how the flagship Samsung phones compare to the Google Pixel 5. Here the S20 FE is a lot more comparable to the Google Pixel 5. In other words, it feels a little bit more of a degraded performance over the more Samsung flagship phones. But yet again, the S20 FE does produce a very vibrant tone throughout the image and is still the better phone when it comes to taking ultra-wide photography over the Google Pixel 5. Now the same couldn't be said, however, when we move things indoors. Here the Google Pixel 5 is just, again, a flagship phone when it comes to taking low light photography. With night mode, you can see the differences are pretty much night and day, be it in its normal mode or even if we move into ultra wide. If you were to turn on flash, yet again the Google Pixel 5 provides a more neutral tone, whereas the S20 FE has a bit more of a warmish yellowish tone. Again, the same could be said in its ultra wide format. Moving over past low light photography, we move into the selfie camera. And here, yet again, the Google Pixel 5 comes out on top by producing a great overall tone from the background image, so in this respect the Honda E, and my face. The same again could be said in more like cinematic pictures and photography, that again, despite the high megapixel count of the S20 FE selfie camera, the Google Pixel 5 would be my pick. Moving into more of low light photography indoors, and while this isn't a perfect example, you can see again that the Google Pixel 5 does a better job throughout the tone. Now the only other thing I would say on top of that is the fact that the Google Pixel 5 has a fantastic portrait mode. While I wasn't able to compare this to the S20 FE, you can see the differences are remarkable. Specifically when it comes to low light photography, the Google Pixel 5 is unbelievably good in this domain, making the S20 FE look pretty poor. Now moving past still photography, we've actually got video capabilities, and here the S20 FE is able to record 4K 60 FPS with EIS enabled from its rear camera, and at the front records up to 4K 60 FPS as well. That'll be with no EIS stabilization. If you want EIS stabilization, that'll be at 1080p 60 FPS. That is still an improvement over the Google Pixel 5, which is only capable of 1080p 30 FPS. So in this domain, the S20 FE does a fantastic job. In comparison to both the phones, what I will say is that the S20 FE, very much like the other Samsung flagship phones, does struggle a little bit with choppiness when you're moving around the scene. However, when you're just going to be walking or let's say running in a singular direction, then what I will say is the S20 FE does a fantastic job. In terms of the overall color tones that you get, again, both phones are fantastic. I really do like what Samsung have achieved with the S20 FE, specifically at this more cheaper price tag in comparison to the Samsung flagship phones, which are in excess of £1,200. And in this respect, the S20 FE does hold its own. So on the whole, what do I make about the S20 FE? Specifically in comparison to the Google Pixel 5, which I've been heavily comparing to in this video? Well, truthfully, I think Samsung have done a good job on the whole with this phone. While it might not feel as premium at the back, and while it might have a bit of a protruding camera, and I'm really not a fan of its in-display fingerprint sensor, it is otherwise a pretty flawless phone. It does a great job in terms of its cameras, both front and back. It's got a great performance, it's got great storage capabilities as well. The Android experience is good because that's really aided with its more powerful chipset, but it does come in at a little bit more of a pricey tag in comparison to the Google Pixel 5. Truthfully, there's no real winner in this domain. I think it depends as to what kind of use case you are. If you want the pure Android experience, but you don't really mind sacrificing on audio quality, namely when it comes to its stereo speakers, then the Google Pixel 5 is a great option and it's just a little bit cheaper than the S20 FE. If, however, audio, like myself, is really important to you, then the S20 FE might prove to be potentially the best Android phone you can buy for the price in comparison to the Google Pixel 5. But that's just my thoughts and my opinions about it. Do let me know in the comments below what you make of the S20 FE and indeed the Google Pixel 5. Which phone would you choose? Alright guys, I've been Totally Dubbed. If you like this video, make sure you give it a like, subscribe to see more, and of course favourite and share for me to continue delivering these honest, detailed comparisons. Alright guys, take care and bye bye.